Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui in Beijing. In a move widely praised by internet users, the Ministry of Public Security announced on Tuesday that people can take photos or shoot videos of on-duty police officers. The decision comes after rising public concerns over police brutality in the country, sparked by the death of a Beijing resident 2 months ago, allegedly due to police brutality. Will new protocols improve police work and boost transparency of law enforcement? How effectively will they be implemented? And will they hinder police officers in getting their jobs done? To answer these questions and more, we are joined in the studio by Victor Gao, Director of the China National Association of International Studies, and Yin Bo, Associate Professor with the Beijing Normal University. But before we get started, let's look at this.
For police officers, it's a daily challenge to get the job done effectively, yet properly. The recent case of a young man who died after Beijing police seized him for allegedly soliciting prostitution again raised the question, what is acceptable police behavior? To answer that, the Ministry of Public Security has released a demonstration video. For starters, the badge should be carried at all times. Plainclothes officers should show it to identify themselves to individuals they deal with. Officers are required to carry and use video recorders to document the enforcement process. Police weapons can be used on bystanders who violently obstruct police work. Onlookers should be allowed to film officers working as long as it doesn't get in the way of enforcement. Officers are expected to work under civilian supervision and on camera. Traffic police are advised to keep their emotions in check to avoid escalating tension resulting from agitated language and actions. They are expected to pay special attention to accompanying children when dealing with drivers.
Regulating police enforcement behavior improves the quality of public services. Regulated enforcement protects people's rights. At the same time, police power and rights are brought under control.
For police officers, the job comes with danger, and doing it right may make it just a little bit safer for both them and the people they protect.
Now, there have been different voices and interpretations about the feasibility and the effectiveness of the execution of this controversial regulation and announcement. Now, first of all, do you think this is controversial or it just came in time?
I don't think this new regulation is controversial at all. I think it's long overdue and it's a little bit too late. Fortunately, we now have this new regulation allowing citizens and the public at large to take photos or pictures of law enforcement activities when they are taking place. And there is always a dilemma as far as law enforcement is concerned, as between you need to, on the one hand, fully authorize the police officers to take action whenever there is a need to take action, but on the other hand, there is always a need for the police to avoid using any excessive police force or brutal police force or even violence against the public. So how do you really strike a balance and achieve the equilibrium point is a challenge not only for the Chinese public security officers, but for many other police forces throughout the world. In China, we need to strike the right balance, and I don't think the police officers should be allowed to make a smaller incident into a larger incident. When they see people taking photographs, sometimes they turn their wrath on the onlookers rather than dealing with the specific task that they need to do. So I think this new regulation, again, is a landmark regulation in terms of better law enforcement activities in China.
Do you think this is a landmark document that will help?
Yeah, probably yes. I think in most of the countries in the world, they have such kind of rules regulating the police law enforcement, such as the PACE, Police and Criminal Evidence Act in the United Kingdom, and in our country, we begin to enact such a kind of inner regulations on the police law enforcement. I think it comes in time.
But strong rebound actually comes from police officers themselves who say there's always the extreme cases of sudden death, such as the one of Lei Yang, who allegedly died of suffocation. Was that because of excessive use of force? Now, all of the records supposedly taken by the mobile phone have been erased, and all of the hidden cameras in the streets that may have documented what happened at the site were also wiped out and erased. So this caused strong debates as to whether the law enforcement personnel themselves did something wrong.
Well, I would say that the incident involving the death of Mr. Lei Yang, who passed away a couple of months ago in Beijing, is a very extreme case. And normally when you have a violent death of any person, especially involving law enforcement officers, the first thing you need to do is to come up with a complete chronology of all the events which lead eventually to the death of that person. Now, in this particular case, it's very, very apparent that the chronology has been manipulated. It's a false chronology, and someone or the policeman involved in this particular case had come up with false evidence, and they fabricated the evidence, and they tried to change the nature of the death so that they would shoulder no responsibilities. So this is no longer law enforcement misbehavior, for example. This is pure and simple illegal. And it's a violation of all the laws that we can think about. So I would say the death of Lei Yang and whatever misbehavior or illegality involved should be considered as an exception. Most of the police officers in our country are law-abiding police officers, and they are ready to sacrifice their lives for the protection of the people. And those who behaved so miserably and illegally, most likely, in the death of Lei Yang should be singled out, and justice need to be brought about.
The release of this announcement by the Ministry of Public Security is hailed as a landmark progress. However, what do you think of the alleged abuse by the media of the document to only emphasize overwhelmingly one side of the story that benefits, for example, the onlookers and netizens?
I think probably because nowadays the conflict is arise between the general public and the court, the authority, and the police actually involved such kind of conflict dealing. But this kind of regulation is actually can be used to regularize the police action, especially when they deal with the cases. But however, I mean, a lot of the people seems to cherish such kind of feeling that the authority use some weapons and their power to suppress the general public. Sometimes I think it's not fair, but we need to strike a balance between such kind of.
Here is a debate as to who are the vulnerable social groups, who are the weak side. The police officers in China say they are paid poorly, they have a meager income, and yet the circumstances under which they enforce the laws are becoming increasingly dangerous and adverse. Therefore, their temperament is bad. They have their sentiment, emotions, and therefore that will naturally lead to the possible abuse of power. On the other hand, I mean, netizens say, with the use of videotapes, look, the policemen have the absolute power, which cannot be checked and regulated, to erase the records. As I said earlier, and the onlookers and the netizens say they are the absolute and unconditional victims and the weak side in the conflict. So which side do you think is on the right side of history?
Well, the first point I want to make is that in any society, including the Chinese society, law enforcement agencies are always very, very important. We have to depend on the law enforcement officers for the protection of our lives and the maintenance of social stability. On the other hand, police brutality, police violence is not an exceptional thing in any society in the United States. For example, I have heard so much about police brutality. Now, each social group, including the police forces, sometimes may feel they are disadvantaged or advantaged in different ways, but that's a very different issue. No disadvantage, even if they do exist, would give any police officer any reason or any justification for police violence against the ordinary citizens. Therefore, I think, allow me to emphasize this equilibrium point. The police officers need to be fully authorized to do their job, but on the other hand, no excuse should be given to police officers if they commit excessive force or use brutality in doing the law enforcement jobs.
I think all kinds of this kind of rules and regulations is used to restrict the power, abuse of the power for the police, because the police really enjoys, incredible power. But it is their own duty to, to identify the suspect, to capture the suspect, to detain the suspect. And I think it's very important for them to exercise their own power properly. So it's very necessary to have such kind of regulations. In any countries, we have such kind of regulations to regularize the police.
Victor, here is a voice which says loud and clear, this regulation released by the Ministry of Public Security is not directly intended to regulate the behavior itself. Rather, it serves as a wake-up call. It's a game changer to raise the awareness of the law enforcement personnel about how to be more professional. Okay? You are increasingly put under the scrutiny of the media, and you are increasingly put under the oversight of the general public. Don't think to yourselves that you can do whatever you like. So this is generally a matter of awareness, right? And this is the essence of rule of law, and this is the spirit of rule of law.
Yes, partially, you're absolutely right. However, the irony actually is that I don't think there has been ever a regulation in China which prohibits the citizens in China from taking photographs or taking videos of police law enforcement activities in the public. I don't think there is any prohibition against that. But the reality up to today is that police officers normally will turn their wrath to any onlookers who are taking photographs or taking videos.
Which may lead to the leaks of state secrets.
Well, that's their claim at least. Therefore, I think this regulation announced today makes it very clear, and it actually enables the population in China at large to take photographs, and this will serve as an additional layer of checks and balances against the police excessive force, because from today, the police officers will know that they are being watched. And they are being watched by the society at large, and anyone in the street or on the site of the law enforcement activities can take photographs or can take a video clipping so that their behavior, whether legal or illegal, will be recorded. And this will hopefully serve as the right deterrence for excessive use of force by police.
I think the right of supervision is actually authorized by the constitutional law. In many countries, a constitutional law actually provide such kind of enactment or provision that authorize the people to supervise all the criminal justice agencies, all the law enforcement agencies. And probably that in our country, we actually have the traditional policy or principle of what they call the must line. Must line means that people has a priority. People must have the power or right to supervise the police and all the other criminal justice agencies.
Right. Perhaps the law enforcement personnel got to come to terms with the brutal fact that they are now put on grill. They are put under scrutiny, and this has never happened before. Therefore, there are good reasons for the general public to feel comfortable, and yet at the same time they have to be reminded that this document serves purposes on both sides. But you are watching Dialogue with Victor Gao and Dr. Yin Bo. We are discussing the latest release of a document that serves to regulate the excessive behavior of the police officers. We'll be back in a few minutes. Please stay with us. Welcome back. We were discussing the release of a document. However, on the other hand, I mean, it could be more of an issue concerning the code of conduct and professionalism of this special group of the society. Now, I'd like to have your comments on the general level of the professionalism that is supposed to be abided by the police officers?
Well, one encouraging thing in China is that over the past 10 to 20 years, I would say, that if you want to become a police officer, you need to go to a police academy, which is a 4-year bachelor degree education. Only after you finish that education, getting a degree and getting a license, you can become a police officer. Therefore, in general terms, police officers in China are well educated. There are also retired army officers who eventually will be transferred back to the police force to beef up the police force. But the simple point is that most of the police officers, with very few exceptions, are well educated. On the other hand, I think police officers, especially in major cities nowadays, are faced with increasing pressure. And criminals of all kinds are now resorting to heavy weapons sometimes, or heavy instruments of violence against the people. And police officers need to be on constant alert, and they need to take reactive measures against potential crimes or gangsters in cities committing crimes against innocent people. Therefore, I think the pressure is there. However, I want to emphasize that the point in discussion now, and what really upsets the society at large, is the so-called police violence, not necessarily against the criminals, but in many cases against innocent people. And that's wrong, and that's illegal in many cases, and that's not to be tolerated. And I think the new regulation will help the public in China going a big way forward in preventing that boom.
We got to discuss some of the details concerning the protocol for the law enforcement personnel. For example, one of the basic things a police officer got to do in front of the big crowd is to show your badge, right? I'm the police officer. You have the right to defend your own rights, but I'm the law enforcement personnel. You have to follow blah, blah, blah. Now, you have to show the badge to identify your profession. But in some cases, our police officers fail to do this. Now, does that reflect the lack of a professional awareness? This is something that got to capture the attention of the media.
Yes, the police need to be more professional. The first thing that I think in every Western country, the first thing for the police is to show your identity card. Because if the police officer hasn't shown this ID card, it might be another criminal, another a gangster that may cheat you, frame you up, and it may create more crimes and other antisocial behaviors. So I think the most important thing at the beginning is to show your professionalism and show your ID card, and then start to investigate the cases.
In the United States, for example, forgive me for drawing a parallel comparison, though it's a difficult job. At the beginning of the process of law enforcement, the officer would first of all use one hand to raise the badge. On the other, they put their hand on the gun. What do you think of the diversity of the circumstances for law enforcement in the United States, and what's the casualty of police officers each year, given the gun-related violence that's been so rampant in this country?
Well, I was educated partially, at least, in the United States, and I think the presumption in the United States is that if you are stopped by a police officer, you just follow his order. You have the right to remain silent, of course. You have the right to refuse to answer his questions, but you need to follow his instructions. And that will create a situation where the police, on the one hand, does not need to commit, in theory at least, violence against the person he or she wants to investigate, for example, and the citizen, if he or she is innocent, will have no reason to worry about being investigated or interrogated by the police. And he or she has the right to hire a lawyer eventually down the road to help him or her to go through the whole process. In China, you talked about the badge, for example, that police need to produce. But in real honesty, in China, counterfeits are so commonplace. And if I'm a citizen and if I'm stopped in the street by a person who called himself a policeman, who produced a police badge, I, for example, probably will not 100% believe that he is the real policeman. I still want to go through another layer of making myself assured that that person is a real police rather than a fake police. So I think in China the situation is a little bit more complicated.
Exactly. For example, some of the onlookers may not necessarily trust that you are
Yes,
a cop.
you're right.
You are wearing the uniform, but fakes and the kind of products. I mean, such a misbehavior is so prevalent, so common, that ordinary folks have good reasons to doubt. Right. What do you think of the benefit of doubt in the Chinese society?
Because in our country, it's live in a very complicated society and with a huge population. And I mean, after the what do we call the cultural revolution, that people seems to be lack of trust in each other.
Right.
And we still need to rebuild the culture. We build the culture of honesty, the credit, and many stuff that to me resumed. But at this moment, people seems to still lack of the trust, confidence in the society, in the government, in many stuff. So at this moment, we still need to make use of some regulations to make everything transparent, to create such a kind of image that we only trust the laws, trust the codes.
Gentlemen, another detail of the video demonstration used by the Ministry of Public Security for police officers is why some of the things that may happen in front of the camera may cause misunderstanding. For example, the police officer is not supposed to stand in front of someone who falls on his or her knees, because that will immediately cause people's anger and resentment that the officers don't have the sufficient sympathy for the woman or the man who is on their knees in front of the camera. Now, why do you think this is a subtle moment?
I think, ironically or unfortunately, it is a tradition in many cases in China for hundreds, if not for thousands of years, for sometimes for ordinary people to fall on their knees to plead to a government officer. And sometimes they may actually misuse that tradition or habit. And sometimes when they are in front of a police officer or group of police officers, they may actually fall down on their knees, try to plead for whatever cause they stand for or grievances that they may want to, get rid of. And sometimes it really creates a very undemocratic or uneven situation. Now also, nowadays, almost everyone has a smartphone or a video camera, and you can actually take photographs or video clips from different angles about the same incident. Therefore, I think if you have a picture, it should not be considered that's the totality of the truth, because eventually you need to gather all the evidences together to come up with a more comprehensive view about the special nature of an incident, rather than believing in one photo versus the other. Because eventually, I think we should also do our best to avoid any misinterpretation of the police behavior. Eventually, I think it's a balancing act.
I have a little bit different point of view. I think it's because of the accountability system, a quite peculiar accountability system. Now, how the government evaluates the police performance. If they haven't maintained the stability, if they create some disaster, even though it is not their own duty or accountability, but the police may be accountable to such kind of mischief. So at this moment, the police has no other choice. He can only choose to calm the people down. So
efforts got to be made to educate the general public as well as to
Yes,
how
you're
to
right.
follow the decency and the basic bottom line of the code of conduct. Now, having said this, before we wrap up this discussion, here is yet another controversial point. The police officers may find it very difficult to accept this protocol. What do you think of their defiance and resistance? Because they say, if I refuse to take any action coercively to bring that guy to justice, no one would say anything wrong. At most, they would say, your ability to do that could be questionable. But if they did step in to try to put someone under arrest, and that guy suddenly dies, then he will be held accountable and responsible. He might run the risk of being thrown behind the bars. And he will make a choice between the two options, right? One is his inability his weakness. The other is his legal risks. I mean, no one would run the legal risks in getting the job done in their assessment of the scenario. What do you think of this?
Yeah, I think this may be a dilemma, and I think both the police force as well as the society at large need to readjust to the new situation very quickly. But allow me to emphasize 2 points. One is that Chinese people, the society at large, need to be educated again and again that they need to respect the law enforcement activities of the police force. That's number one. Therefore, they need to cooperate with the police, they need to listen to the police instructions, and they cannot resist police unless they have an absolutely legitimate reason. On the other hand, I think police officers should be fully allowed and authorized to do whatever that is necessary to carry out their duty to protect the people. On the other hand, they need to avoid any excessive use of police force. That's the absolute point, and every police officer needs to do this balancing act on a constant basis.
Yes, indeed. For centuries, China remains an authoritarian, if not totalitarian, regime from the Western perspective. Therefore, here comes the question as to the majority. Here comes the question about the tyranny of a mob rule. I mean, you always have the rioters who refuse to comply with the laws and the regulations. And they would go ahead no matter what. They don't give any. They simply refuse to respect the law from the perspective of general public. What do you think of the tyranny of a mob rule?
I think the modern rule has two elements. The first is that the rule must be provided or enacted by the general public. It's a kind of democratic rule. But second is that we need to apply the rule in a very strict way. As regards the rules, the inner protocols for the police, we can see these rules actually, on the one hand, to enforce to regularize the police law enforcement, but on the other hand is to protect the general public from the police violence. But this kind of rules, we can clearly look at. This rule is actually not so, what do we call it, mature at this moment. I think we still need to expand or clearly think whether it is feasible at the moment, and especially for those police, some in the very remote area, there are lack of the certain facilities where they can be generally or widespreadly applied at the moment. We need to still think about whether we should make it more detailed or at this moment to rethink about all the articles.
Right, indeed, it takes time to fine-tune the execution of a good regulation. Thank you very much for being part of this meaningful dialogue. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.